Weight, around 2 pounds. Speed, 100 miles an hour, 200 in a dive. The favorite hunting falcon of nearly every civilization since ancient Egypt, now in imminent danger of extinction. This is the story of one of these incredible birds. Starting as a tiny bundle of down, she has just 90 days to learn everything she needs to survive a 10,000-mile migration all alone. That's not much time, and there's a lot to learn. Wonderful world of Disney. Now, from the wonderful world of Disney, Varda, the Peregrine Falcon. Northern winter was over. Spring had come to central Alaska, and the great flocks of migratory waterfowl were flying in for the nesting season. They came in a procession far older than recorded history. Pintail and canvasback, harlequin and mallard, snow geese and Canada geese, and many others. With the waterfowl, as inescapable as their own shadows, came the predators. One in particular had traveled with them all the way from their wintering grounds far to the south, the Peregrine Falcon. Strangely, among falcons, only the female is called a falcon. And this particular falcon had recently returned to the same cliff that had been her home and nesting site for many summers. It was a male peregrine called a tiercel, and he too had been drawn to the cliff which had been his home for many seasons past. Since last summer, these two had gone their separate ways, but spring had brought them together again. They had spent a few days getting reacquainted and had hunted together, and were now about to begin their mysterious and spectacular courting flights. No one knows for certain what this ritual really means, and few human eyes have ever even watched it. Cliff, the falcon had scratched out a bare hollow that would serve as this summer's nest. Above Above it, a projecting rock served the tiercel as a lookout point, and he now began assuming his duties as defender and chief provider. From now till summer's end, he would be engaged in a marathon of prowess and endurance. Spring quickly became summer, and throughout the area, nests were being built and eggs were being laid. High on the crag, the falcon had laid 3 eggs, spaced a day or 2 apart. During the 30 days each would take to hatch, she would brood them almost constantly, while the tiercel stood guard or went hunting. Ducks were his favorite prey, which is why the peregrine is sometimes also called the duck hawk. Tragically, each year, fewer peregrine nests hold healthy eggs. And a nest across the river was typical. Thousands of miles away, man treats his crops with chemical sprays and powders. Small birds feed on the crops. When they become the falcon's prey, the chemicals are absorbed and concentrated in the falcon's bodies, making their eggs infertile or too fragile to bear their weight. The short northern summer was at its height when, a day or 2 apart, the healthy peregrine eggs had hatched. Of the 3 chicks, 2 were tiercels. The oldest, the largest, and from the start the most adventurous, was Varda, the only female. For their parents, the work was about to begin in earnest. Now, when Father came home with food, he didn't even stop to visit. Instead, the falcon went up to meet him. Maneuver recalling their courtship flights, Father passed the food along to his mate in midair. That way he could return to the hunt without delay, while Mother headed for home and 3 very hungry youngsters. Falcon chicks grow almost visibly from day to day, and their appetites grow even faster. By the middle of their 4th week, the youngsters were also showing signs of independence and curiosity, especially Varda. Now, Mother had begun to leave the young ones alone to help with the hunting. Her return was always a moment of great excitement. Of all the chicks, Varda was the oldest, the biggest, and the closest to Mother's landing place. So like any good predator, she helped herself to the whole thing. Then something more serious caught Mother's eye, a marsh hawk. Slower than a peregrine, but much bigger, it was a real threat to the chicks. Father was never far off, and it didn't take him long to join the battle. All the noise had attracted the attention of a pine marten, who usually hunted in the aspen grove at the top of the cliff. He was quick to discover the unguarded chicks. August put a new nip in the air and the first tinge of color on the trees. All through the valley, the young were growing up and beginning to test their wings. Soon they'd be flying. Varda was especially impatient to learn. Her parents staged daily aerial circuses that left the young ones spellbound. But there was something about the first step that held them back. So for now, it was their necks that got all the exercise. Day by day, the prospect of flying got all the youngsters more and more excited. Finally, one day, before she knew quite what was happening, Varda found herself airborne and scared to death. From not too far above, Mother kept an eye out for trouble. But she couldn't do much about the kind of trouble Varda got into. Her wings were getting tired, but landing on a cliff turned out to be impractical. Finally, she found a landing area that exactly suited her abilities, the 100-acre flat across the river. She was happy to be down, but as soon as her wings had recovered, she'd have to face the problem of getting up again. For that, she'd need a nice, high takeoff platform. A few days more, and all the young falcons were flying reasonably well. For the migration, though, they had to know how to use the peregrine's most potent hunting weapon, the stoop. This is a skill their parents have to teach them by example. The stoop is a weapon of both power and surprise, a dive attaining speeds of over 200 miles per hour. Varda was eager to give it a good try, and she set out to gain plenty of altitude. Nearer the ground, her brothers were content to learn the art one short, safe step at a time. High above, Varda began her stoop. In seconds, she was doing well over 100 miles an hour. At speeds like this, a tiny error could be disastrous. Varda pulled out, just in time. In September, the days were noticeably cooler. Perched on the ledge that had been her only home, Varda had no way of knowing that she was seeing her mother for the last time. The nesting season was over, and the migration was beginning. With every flock of departing waterfowl, the countryside grew quieter and lonelier. So there was something rather comforting about the appearance of a young tiercel Varda had never seen before, hunting ducks in a pond nearby. The newcomer evidently wasn't too experienced, but his second try got the job done. The stranger, Vulcan, was about to settle down for a good meal. To Varda, there seemed no reason why he should object to sharing it. Vulcan was a little surprised, but like Varda, he was still young and used to eating family style. Peregrines are very particular about bathing after meals. So after sharing their lunch, the friendly thing to do was share a bath too. By now, the migration was on in earnest. Soon, the last of the great flocks would be gone. One day, Varda's two brothers set out on a hunt. The search for game took them so far away they never came back. Unwittingly, they'd started their first migration. Only Varda was left, restlessly aware that something was wrong, but not sure what. The trouble was simply that she hadn't left home. Instinct demanded it, and survival depended on it. But Varda, who had been so quick at everything else, was slow to get the message. The rivers and ponds, so recently teeming with life, were deserted. So she ranged ever farther into unfamiliar country, and thus, like her brothers, began to migrate almost in spite of herself. Now, too, the first storms of the Arctic winter began sweeping her east and south, and soon she found herself crossing the Canadian Rockies. Usually, peregrines fly a more direct route south to their wintering grounds, but the storm had started Varda on a less frequented path in an easterly direction toward the Atlantic coast. She was averaging over 100 miles a day, and one morning she crossed the western shore of Hudson Bay and watched a school of beluga whale lazing in the icy water. Another few days brought her to James Bay at the lower end of Hudson Bay, and here a surprise was in store for her. There was no mistaking that voice. It belonged to her old friend, Vulcan. He obviously recognized her too and came swooping down to say hello. Vulcan's migratory urge was more impatient than Varda's, and next morning found him already gone. Alone again, Varda resumed her journey too. First close encounter with mankind came shortly after crossing into North Carolina. To her eyes, it was simply a large animal frightening up quail, and that meant easy hunting. Varda never knew how close a call she'd had with death, but what happened next in its way was just as close. She'd escaped the falling chemicals, but somehow she felt the need of a bath. And a little further down the way, she found what looked like an ideal place. Below her now stretched miles of moss-hung cypress and black pine. She had reached the swamps of northern Florida. More new terrain to be investigated. Varda had gotten used to some strange sights in her travels, but here were even stranger ones. First of all, a bird that went fishing. Then there was a fish that went walking. This was the so-called walking catfish, capable of breathing air and traveling from pond to pond in search of its prey. She didn't know what to make of that thing either. Varda obviously had a lot to learn about swamps, but at least not far away, she found what looked like an ideal roost for the night. Naturally, Varda had never heard of tilting at windmills, much less of windmills that tilted back. But whatever this thing was trying to do, she wasn't going to stand still for it. The next day found Varda heading down the Atlantic coast of Florida. There it was again, Vulcan's voice, which she hadn't heard in weeks now. In the excitement of the reunion, they both forgot a little of their natural caution and didn't notice that they were being watched intently from the ground. The pigeon was tethered and surrounded by a nearly invisible net, a falcon trap.
Easy, easy. Look at you. You're beautiful.
Entangled in the net, Varda was helpless. There was no way to resist as the man slid the falconer's hood over her head and pulled the drawstring closed. Yet if any captive can be called lucky, Varda was lucky. Her captor was Charlie Cypress, a Seminole Indian and an expert falconer. He could hardly believe he had caught such a magnificent bird. To keep her from flailing around and hurting herself, Charlie managed to slip her into a sock with a toe cut out. Now to get her home before she got too warm. Charlie's two other birds, a Harris hawk and a red-tail, greeted the newcomer with total indifference. A more enthusiastic welcome waited for her in the house, where Charlie lived with his dog Ishto, his wife Sally, and their daughter Mary Ann.
Hi. Hi, Daddy.
Well, I finally got one. And she's a beauty. We'll have duck, and quail, maybe even pheasant.
Is she all right?
I've got to get out of this before she gets too hot.
Before he could safely take off the sock, Charlie had to attach the leather thongs, called jesses, with which the falconer controls his bird. The jesses were connected to a metal swivel and then to a long leash.
I guess you understand she's going to be my closest friend for the next couple days.
If you really mean it about the duck dinners, I guess it's worth it.
Now, let's get this sock off him.
Well, darling, I guess there's nothing else for us to do but the cooking.
Now would begin the first and most important step in the training of a falcon. She had to be manned, which meant Charlie had to stay with her day and night until she learned to accept and trust him. For a creature as free and wide-ranging as a peregrine, that would be no easy lesson. The next couple of days would be anxious ones. Until Varda was manned, Charlie wouldn't even be able to get her to eat. Some falcons have been known to reject captivity so completely that they've starved themselves to death. Manning Varda didn't mean Charlie could neglect his other birds, and this morning was the red-tail's turn to go hunting. Ishto was along as an invaluable part of the team. Varda was here as an observer, and Charlie hoped she'd learn at least a little from what she saw. With the hawk unhooded and unleashed, and Ishto already casting for a trail, the hunt began.
Come on, Ishto. Get a bird.
Within moments, Ishto had picked up the scent of a pheasant.
Get her, come on.
The plan was for Ishto to spook the bird into the air where he'd be prey for the hawk. But the pheasant had already seen that hawk, and he'd take his chances with the dog. When the pheasant did fly, he was so close to the trees that the hawk never had a chance. Ishto went back to work, and this time he found a rabbit, the red-tail's favorite game. Trouble was, the red-tail's favorite game had been a steady diet at Charlie's house for quite a while.
Rabbit again?
That's right, kid. There's not going to be any change in our diet until this gal's trained. Get some of her stew meat for me, would you please? She's a lot hungrier than I am.
I bet she is.
Daddy.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Come on, darling. We better leave them alone for a while.
It seemed to Charlie that Varda was a lot calmer than she had been. Though, of course, she was still far from reconciled to captivity. But now, or very soon, she had to start accepting food. She was already visibly thinner and weaker than she had been yesterday. Time could soon run out.
Give it a try, will you?
Varda was calmer, and something in the man's assured and gentle manner seemed to calm her even more. Now, quite suddenly, she realized what a very hungry bird she was.
You want some more?
So Varda's first big hurdle was behind her. But next morning, before he went to work, Charlie leashed her to a hawk block in the yard, along with his other birds. Getting used to that would be her next step. In a few days, Varda's flight training began, with Charlie attaching pieces of stew meat to a lure equipped with duck feather wings. Varda was getting to like stew meat more and more, and she was eager to do a little work to get it. Each day, Charlie made her work a little harder, until eventually he replaced the leash with a long cord called a creance line, and the lure became a moving target. By the end of her second week, she was ready for her first free flight. But by now, conditioned by the leash and the line, she didn't even know she was free. Now it was time to fit her with bells to make her audible in case she strayed out of sight for any reason. From here on, all her flights were free flights, and for Charlie, each one began with anxiety. Each time, though, the sight of the lure brought her quickly back again. But now he didn't let her catch it right away. By forcing her to make a series of passes, he put her through a daily workout that was meant to be part training and part exercise. For Charlie and Varda, though, it was soon more of a game than anything else. A month had gone by. It was the night before Varda's first real hunt for wild game. She weighed 2 pounds, 3 ounces, which Charlie had come to think was her sharpest weight. An ounce more and she might not be hungry enough to hunt. An ounce or two less, she could be too weak or too hungry to stick around. If Charlie had miscalculated, he stood a good chance of losing her. Between hunting with a hawk and hunting with a falcon. The falcon is allowed to stand on overhead, circling and waiting while dog and man work below to find game in the brush. Of course, Charlie's mind wasn't on history, but actually what he was doing right now was no different from what falconers have been doing for more than 3,000 years.
Come on now, let's go. Come on, find a bird. Let's get some.
missed the quail because it had been too close to cover. Now it was time to call her back and start again. But Varda was already after other game just beyond the trees. She must have been a shade hungrier than Charlie had thought. No matter how hard she tried, though, the bells betrayed her. The mud hens heard her coming and took refuge underwater. The mud hens had taken Varda quite a ways from Charlie, and now a strange sound and a stranger sight drew her even further. Of course, she didn't connect these noisy things with the people on the ground controlling them by radio. To a peregrine, anything that flew was either a threat or a meal. Well, they weren't coming after her, and she was getting hungrier by the minute. Still, the situation called for a little study. With one on the ground, Varda was free to concentrate on the other one. And whatever that thing was, its skill at acrobatics was nothing short of fantastic. Varda's sense of triumph quickly gave way to puzzlement. She was victorious, but over what? Its oily little innards weren't exactly appetizing. There weren't even any feathers to pluck. Whatever it was completely inedible. Varda's exhilarating sense of freedom was gone now. She had used up a lot of energy chasing the airplane, and hunger was really beginning to gnaw at her. But the sound of the bells preceded her everywhere. Eventually, when twilight came, Varda had to give up. It meant she'd be even hungrier tomorrow. But surely then, her luck would change. Sunrise found her trying to rid herself of the bells, while growing hunger dredged up memories of food. Then she saw something that pushed the memories into the background. And so it went for another day. The bells were a constant handicap, and memories of food and Charlie came more and more often. Varda had had other setbacks in her time, but this was different, and she knew it. This was life or death. The third day got off to a more encouraging start. Her luck had changed at last, but not for long. To care how big that bobcat was. He'd stolen her duck, and she was going to get it back no matter what. Wasn't only bigger than Varda, he was just as determined. Helplessly, she watched him escape with the only food she'd even touched in 3 long days. She was beyond mere hunger now. She was starving. There was only one course open to her. She was just as much a captive as she'd ever been. Was Vulcan. Charlie knew why she'd come back. In fact, he'd been expecting her. Wearing the jesses and bells that he had put on her, she was helpless on her own. But up there was where she belonged. Not to him, not to anyone. And then there was the matter of her dwindling species. Maybe, just maybe, she could help keep it alive a little longer. had been the best falcon Charlie had ever seen. But her future lay elsewhere, not in the world of man. At least now she had a future, and it lay ahead in the wild blue freedom of the sky.
And there'll be more children's viewing from the world of Walt Disney next Sunday afternoon at 5. But stay with us now for the latest details from the TAS TV newsroom, followed by Science and Technology in Beyond 2000.